Hi guys, and today going to be making a giant mecha diorama. Kind of a post-apocalyptic thing with a kind of spider tank involved. And to start with, blocking out the key elements using some styrofoam, as well as a little bit of foam core, and underfloor insulation board as the base of the piece, which is basically just thin styrofoam. Then making some elevation with some more pieces, and just dry fitting them to see how it looks. Then, realising it wasn't big enough, taking a piece of foam core and remounting the piece using that as a larger base. I then decided to use the new elevation on the front as a kind of dried out riverbed, as a sort of unplanned feature. And as the overall concept, I want a mecha in front of this kind of abandoned old crumbling bunker, and then a few guys on the ground to give a sense of scale and just looking around into the bunker. And to make up the bulk of the new basing, just adding some more bits of the underfloor insulation, as well as beveling them around, just getting some nice elevation. And it's good to get as much of the bulk as you can down at this stage, because that means you have to rely less on the sculptor mod later, which the thicker you go, the longer it takes to dry. And just breaking the tiles up with my hand, taking a few extra bits of styrofoam, rolling some stone texture onto them, and gluing them against the kind of elevated hill, just to give a kind of rock face to it. And securing with copious amounts of hot glue. Benefit of using hot glue is that you can also remove bits you don't like. So I decided there was too much stuff in the river, and I wanted to show the actual riverbed going down, so using a knife and fingers, just tore off some of the styrofoam. Then I cut a piece of plasticard to the width of the doors, and then glued the top piece on, so I can then add some bulk on top of that. And using a piece of foam core as a bit of additional support that can then hold up some more insulation board. And then just double checking that the plasticard fits inside the new frame. Next, mixing up a batch of sculptor mold. About 1 part sculptor mold to 1 part water, mixing it thoroughly, but still leaving it a bit lumpy, and then smearing that all over the base, as well as the elevation. Then giving it maybe 10 minutes to dry, and then just going in with fingers and smoothing out any of the extra lumpy parts. And giving it a bit of time just makes it a lot easier to work with. And you get a nice smoother finish on it. And while waiting for that to dry, going to split the door in two, and with some more strips of plasticard, going to add some reinforcements and make it look a bit more like a real door. And I'm only connecting the strips with plastic glue in the middle because I want to bend the doors later, and that will make it easier to do so. Next, once the sculptor mold has dried, mixing together a basing paste to add some texture, and that is a combination of fine cork flock, regular cork flock, black gesso, and PVA. And if you want to, you can add a drop or two of water to make it a lot more fluid. And mix it together thoroughly. I then applied a layer over the entire thing where I wanted there to be dirt. And going for a fairly barren, almost deserty type terrain, with a lot of kind of rocks and some very sparse kind of grass. And for the riverbed, going in with some tiny pieces of gravel and just sprinkling those over the base where the riverbed would have once been. And then with some slightly larger pebbles, going in and just distributing them over the entire piece. Again, going kind of around the river, where there would be a riverbank as well. I then added some wear and tear to the concrete bunker, so just going with fingers and a tool, just picking out a few bits from the edges, and poking a few holes in as well. Then giving it a coat of black gesso. Next, giving the entire thing a coat of a mid-brown paint, and using acrylics for this. Then, once that's dried, going in and mixing the same brown with some white paint to make a lighter tan colour, going in and giving a fairly heavy coating of that, but leaving a few recesses untouched. I describe it as a dry brush, but I don't think that's technically accurate. Then, mixing together an even paler tan colour, going in and giving the concrete a coat. And not being too consistent with the paint job here, because I wanted to look a bit like that kind of natural variance you get in concrete sometimes, especially when it's been out for a long time in the weather. And using that same colour to highlight some of the rocks on the base, as well as give a light dry brush to the gravel in the base of the riverbed. And I didn't want to go too overboard here, just give it a light difference. And then moving on to the doors, where I didn't glue them at the top and the bottom earlier, it makes it a lot easier to bend them, and then you can put a bit of glue on and glue the beam back on. And just bending each of the corners in the centre of the door. And using a pair of clippers here just to give me a slightly tighter curl. As well as using them to add a bit of weathering and a few dents and scratches onto the door. Then moving back to the base, mixing up a even lighter tan colour, although not as light as the concrete, and with a soft brush, just going in and giving a patchy coat of that onto the top parts of the soil. Next, grabbing a pin vise, going to add some bullet holes into the concrete, and just going along in an uneven line and gently poking the needle in. And then also adding a few bullet holes to the plastico doors as well. Before giving it a coat of black gesso. Next, using some PVA, just going to gently scatter around a few blobs onto the base where I want there to be some static grass. And I want this to be really patchy and sparse, because I don't want there to be much vegetation in this world. And going in with this kind of yellow winter grass with the static grass applicator. And just touching the connection point to the piece and sprinkling the static grass through the mesh onto the PVA. And this is one of the easier pieces to do it to because a lot of it is fairly flat, so you can get some nice angles. And that is the base pretty much done, and we can move on to the models. So I knocked up a spider tank in Blender and 3D printed it, and I wanted it to be a very kind of clunky industrial looking design, and I made the legs using simple ball joints to give me a bit of articulation so I could have some fun posing it. And once that's assembled, just using some Vallejo surface primer and giving the entire thing a coat of black primer. Then I'm going to attempt using the speed paints again, So I'm giving the entire thing a coat of a light grey paint. And I'm going to be using a kind of beige coloured speed paint. So I want it to be still quite light in the end, but I want it to be kind of heavily rusty and grimy and dirty as well. And while that's drying, giving the doors a quick coat of gunship green. And most of the paints I'm using are from AK Interactive, but the speed paints are from Army Painter. And where the door has scratches and dents on, and the bullet holes, just giving them a quick dab of metallic. And for the metallics, I'm using P3 paints from Privateer Brass. And then also hitting the external details on the mecha tank with that same kind of dark silver colour. Then, with a medium rust colour, going in and dabbing around where the metallics are, as well as just in the crevices of the door, just to make it a bit more dirty and dank. Then, moving on to the speed paint, giving the entire thing a coat of this kind of brown, kind of varnishy colour. And it does smell quite heavily of varnish as well, which is a slightly weird thing. But it dries matte, and I think it worked a lot better here than on the previous attempts I've used it. And it's quite good for doing panel lining because it goes into the recesses, much like using an ink or a wash. And it's giving me the exact kind of yellowy beige off-white colour that I wanted for the armour plating. Next, with a light brown colour, going in and putting some dust on the lower half of the model. So just going in and giving it a heavy dry brush all over the lower kind of 50% of the model. Then picking out a few details such as the lights on the front. And then with a darker brown speed paint, I'm going to use this as a kind of weathering agent. So to make some oil stains, just giving like a little dab underneath a few of the accessories and just drawing it down so it has the effect of streaking oil. Then gluing the doors into place in the bunker. Then, to add a sense of scale and some human elements, grabbing some 1/72 scale figures from Redbox Games. And these are post-apocalyptic survivors. And giving them a quick paint job. So to start with, giving them a quick dry brush of dark brown. Then picking out most of their clothing with a green colour. And giving the exposed flesh a highlight of pink. And picking out the weapons with the same dark silver I used earlier. And using another mid-brown to pick out a few more of the clothes, and you're done. Then just using a sharp knife to clip them from the bases, and they're ready to super glue onto the base, which can be a bit fiddly. Then final step is to add a few tufts of a very kind of yellowy grass, as well as some of these spiky tufts from Gamer's Grass, which look like large kind of dead shrubberies. And you can use a pair of tweezers to kind of pull apart the branches a bit and make it look a bit more like a bush rather than a one-off upright clump of grass. And with the last tuft down, we're done. A nice kind of easy diorama to do. And I do like some post-apocalyptic mecha. Well, thanks for watching guys. Catch you next week.